What's up, Earth's mightiest subscribers? It's Blerd without fear. Welcome back to the channel. Alright, today's video, we're going to be talking about Batman, number 127 by Chip Zdarsky and Jorge Jimenez. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down exactly who created the new Batman villain, FAILSAFE, as well as what makes FAILSAFE deadly even to its own creator, and how the creation of FAILSAFE calls back to an iconic JLA story arc, Tower of Babel.
You can't see me, you Stevie, wondering how I reach more evolutions than Evie and make it look easy.
Okay, so over the course of the last couple of issues of Chip Zdarsky's Batman run, he has been beset upon by this new villain by the name of FAILSAFE. A villain who, for all intents and purposes, is Batman's version of the Terminator. And the biggest mystery of this new character is who created it. FAILSAFE already existed within the Batcave itself, so who could have put something like that there without Batman's knowledge? Now, I had originally thought about the idea that maybe this is something Batman created and just simply forgot about. And the weird answer is that technically, I was right. This is actually something Batman created and forgot about, but it's a little more complicated than that. In the most recent issue of Batman number 126, Chip Zdarsky introduced us to the Batman of zur-en-arrh. Now, this was a more wacky version of the character that made its debut back in Batman number 113 in 1958, though the version that Chip Zdarsky reintroduced us to is actually from Grant Morrison's Batman Rest in Peace story arc, roughly around the time of Batman number 678, in 2008. This version of Batman of zur-en-arrh was not from some alternate planet in another reality or anything of that nature. This was actually a version of Batman, an alternate personality of Batman that did not have any essence of Bruce Wayne in him whatsoever. Yeah, I know, I get it. Somewhere right now, Moon Knight is cursing, Batman don't let me have shit. He's like, the one thing that most people realize separates me from Batman, I don't get to have. Now Batman's got it. Batman is now on the gimmick. But yeah, the Batman of zur-en-arrh, this alternate personality of Bruce Wayne, actually created the FAILSAFE program, created the entire layout of it, how it works, how it operates, what is supposed to trigger it, which was technically if Batman was to ever cross the line, which technically he didn't do, but FAILSAFE must have some kind of connection to like the internet and media as a whole, because it's taking the story that Batman killed Oswald Cobblepot, which is actually not true. Cobblepot killed himself and framed Batman to make him look like he did it, which would lead me to believe that this FAILSAFE does not have any investigative capacity when it comes to fact-checking anything that it's been told or fed, which I guess is why it's called FAILSAFE and not fact-check. All FAILSAFE knows is Batman crossed the line, therefore Batman must be destroyed. And the reason why this is actually so deadly to the Batman of zur-en-arrh is because the Batman of zur-en-arrh doesn't remember how to destroy the FAILSAFE, and that's kind of the point. How good of a FAILSAFE would it really be if Batman knew how to get rid of it? And even though, yes, these are two separate personalities, they interact with one another in this comic. So very clearly, if the Batman of zur-en-arrh knows something, it's very likely that the Batman himself, Bruce, would know it too, or at the very least, have some kind of a way to find out what it is. So this is why neither Batman proper nor the Batman of zur-en-arrh are particularly effective at taking down this new threat. Now, what makes this even more interesting, aside from the fact that this is clearly something that Batman is out of his weight class in, he's up against a Terminator-style villain that has no remorse whatsoever, and maybe even kind of a bit of a mean streak. This Terminator-esque villain is very vindictive at a point we even see it clawing through a portrait of Batman's parents. So this thing definitely has a mean streak, but what makes this even crazier is that this actually calls back to a storyline from 2000. You might already be familiar with what is easily considered one of the most iconic Justice League story arcs ever created, a story arc by the name of Tower of Babel. This is a story arc that took place during Mark Waid and Howard Porter's JLA number 43 through 46 back in 2000. FAILSAFE, as we learn in this issue, is actually a direct result of a conversation that Superman had with Batman after the fallout of the Tower of Babel story arc, where Batman devised a plan to defeat the Justice League using files that he took from Martian Manhunter and put together before even Manhunter himself had joined the Justice League, as well as a bunch of Batman's own personally created ideas, and these plans had fallen into the hands of Ra's al Ghul, leading to Aquaman becoming terrified of the very water that he lived in and commanded. Kyle Rayner, who was the Green Lantern at the time, was blinded. Martian Manhunter was covered in nanites that would set him on fire anytime he was exposed to oxygen. Flash was stricken with light speed epilepsy that would cause his atoms to, as Kyle Rayner puts it, scatter him to the four winds. Plastic Man was frozen and shattered into pieces. Wonder Woman was pushed into a battle that drew on for so many hours until she had a heart attack, and Superman was rendered powerless by a new form of irradiated kryptonite that quickly began to turn him inside out. Literally. And on top of that, Ra's used a language scrambler on the League that made communication between them virtually impossible. And as you might imagine, chaos ensued. What's funny is that the conversation that ultimately leads to the creation of FAILSAFE is not a conversation that actually happened during that story arc. It's safe to say this conversation has very likely happened at various points in both Batman and Superman, as well as other Justice League related comics, but there really wasn't a dead set conversation between these two really talking about the matter to any major degree. Though there was a very specific conversation like this that happened during 2012's DCAU animated film Justice League Doom. This conversation is almost word for word the same, but during that conversation, Superman asked Batman a simple question. What if you created this plan to destroy the Justice League if we ever got out of line? What was your failsafe for yourself? And Batman simply replied that the failsafe was the Justice League. And that's kind of how the movie ends, more or less, with Batman being voted out of the Justice League, same as he was at the end of Tower of Babel. But in this issue, Chip Zdarsky adds something to that conversation that wasn't ever brought up before, and it's a question that Superman asked that I think is honestly the most important question anyone should have asked if given that answer by Batman, that the League is the answer to Batman. And Superman asked, how does the League take down the man who's planned for us in a world where you know every move? Who stops the Batman? And this is actually what led to the creation of FAILSAFE. Batman had to create something he had no answer to, and the only way he could do that was to transfer over to the Batman of zur-en-arrh personality, so that way Bruce would have no idea exactly what the hell was going on. And then having that personality completely delete the records of the creation of FAILSAFE as well as how to destroy it. That way, if Batman did actually get out of line, he would have no idea how to stop it. And honestly, I think the answer to defeating FAILSAFE is actually quite simple. There's really two easy ways to do this. For one is to show definitive proof that Batman didn't kill Cobblepot. Maybe there is some kind of reasoning function within FAILSAFE that would possibly lead him to say, oh, you actually didn't kill him? Okay, cool, I'm out. But considering how vindictive this machine is and seemingly is very interested in killing its own creator, maybe that wouldn't work. Another thing you could potentially do is put FAILSAFE up against not just Batman by himself. We all know that while Batman is a very strong individual and that he is one of the toughest SOBs in all of the DC Comics universe, there's one thing Batman is always made better by, and that's surrounding himself with his allies. It seems like every time that FAILSAFE has been taken on, whether it's Batman alone or Batman and just some of his allies, or just his allies alone taking on FAILSAFE, they've all, and I mean pun intended, failed against him. So far, FAILSAFE has yet to take on Batman alongside all of his allies. Even though technically they have done this, Batman was not up to his game when he did it. So I'm not even counting the last issue as a true full-on Bat family attack. But who knows, maybe even if they did do it, the results probably wouldn't change. So what does Chip Zdarsky lay out for Batman that could potentially help stop FAILSAFE? Superman. Superman very likely could take out FAILSAFE without even so much as batting an eyelash. But the real question is, would the Batman of zur-en-arrh have thought of that? Would the Batman of zur-en-arrh thought that Bruce, in all of his shame, would eventually break down and ask for help? The Batman of zur-en-arrh is considered to be the purest form of Batman. There's no Bruce Wayne to hold him back, so he probably sees anything that Bruce would typically think of as a weakness. And he probably solved for that as well, thinking, Bruce will probably eventually at some point call in his allies after he's been completely broken. He'll call on Nightwing, Robin, the other Robin, spoiler, Huntress, maybe if he still remembers that she exists, spoiler, so on and so forth. He'll call on all these people. He'll maybe call up Duke Thomas, which he did actually wind up doing. He would call on just about anybody, but probably the last person he would call on is Superman, and that would only be if the chips were absolutely down, and in this case, the chips are, in fact, absolutely down. So I honestly don't think Superman is going to pose any more of a threat to FAILSAFE than what I think a lot of people are probably going to go to thinking. I actually think the next issue, even though, yeah, we see Superman pull up in all his glory, Batman is doing the thing that he doesn't often do when referring to Superman. He's actually saying the quiet parts out loud. The fact that, yes, Superman inspires hope, even for Batman. This isn't news or anything, but just something that Batman doesn't say every single time he encounters Superman. But in this instance, he is actually like, yeah, this is what I needed. But I think the Batman of zur-en-arrh probably saw that coming. And it's probably safe to say that the FAILSAFE also has a FAILSAFE for Superman. But one thing is definitely to be sure, I think that the Batman of zur-en-arrh can't 100% be trusted. We do see at a later point in this that Bruce realizes that the Batman of zur-en-arrh does not value his family. And I think what we're gonna ultimately end up learning, or at least a prediction that I have for this story arc by Chip Zdarsky, is that before this is all over, I think the Batman of zur-en-arrh is going to wind up becoming the villain that Batman does not want to face. A version of himself that's likely going to work against him and his best interests. Because we do see at a point where the Batman of zur-en-arrh is ready to sacrifice Tim Drake. I only say this because a lot of times when writers take up a story arc, especially if they're in it for the long haul, one of the things they'll do is they'll introduce something that is probably seen as something that's a throwaway. It's something that probably you think won't ever come up again. And then later on down the road, down the stretch, when they're ready to wrap everything up, or even if they're just willing to, do something different, they'll come back to that thing they introduced or reintroduced, this case being Zur, which is what apparently Bruce calls the Batman of zur-en-arrh for short. But yeah, I think Zur is going to wind up being a whole problem for Bruce. And even if he doesn't wind up becoming the ultimate thing that Batman has to face over the course of this series, I do think this isn't going to be the last that we see of Zur, even once his story arc wraps up. I think Zur is going to wind up popping up probably more often than not, or at the very least in times where Batman is in a great deal of distress. If you want to know more about the Batman of zur-en-arrh, I go into much greater depth in my previous video for Batman, so go check that out right here. In the meantime, let me know what you thought about Batman number 127. But anyways, let me know what you guys thought about Batman number 127. Do you think FAILSAFE actually has a FAILSAFE for Superman? Do you think Superman's gonna be able to run FAILSAFE's fade? You tell me. Keep it plus ultra and sound off in the comments.